Not a single studio wanted to make Monty Python and the Holy Grail, so a few massive rock stars stepped up and funded the movie. Monty Python and the Holy Grail turns 50 years old this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind the Holy Grail starts at Oxford University in the early 60s, when Terry Jones and Michael Palin first met while performing in the comedy group Oxford Revue. Meanwhile, at Cambridge, Graham Chapman, John Cleese, and Eric Idle met as members of the sketch collective, the Cambridge Footlights. Cleese would later meet Terry Gilliam while on tour with the Footlights in New York City. The six of them then worked on various UK comedy TV shows across the 1960s, getting to know each other in various permutations. And then on May 11th, 1969, after a taping of Do Not Adjust Your Set, they all went out to eat at a tandoori restaurant in Hampstead, and Monty Python was born. And the BBC would give them their own sketch comedy show later that year, Monty Python's Flying Circus, which debuted on September 7th, 1969. It was an immediate hit in the UK, where it ran until 1974, totaling 45 episodes, while it didn't catch on in the US until 74, when it started airing on PBS. During the show's run, the group took a number of sketches from the first and second series and re-recorded them without an audience, compiling them into their first feature film, and now for something completely different. The hope was that this movie would introduce Monty Python to American audiences, but it didn't catch on. Then in 1973, while Flying Circus was still running in the UK, the group proposed a new movie. It would be a comedy satire of King Arthur and the Holy Grail legend, and it would be set half in the Middle Ages and half in modern day. They started writing the first draft of the screenplay in 1973, but they soon abandoned the modern day stuff to just focus on the Holy Grail myth. The script went through 5 drafts before completion, and according to interviews from the DVD extras, Monty Python intentionally kept the characters from retrieving the Grail at the end as to leave the audience with a big letdown and a great anticlimax. Eric Idle, meanwhile, says, "We didn't know how to end it." And Cleese agreed in 2017, saying it ends the way it does because we couldn't think of any other way. Meanwhile, Michael Palin's archives revealed that they had considered a big battle scene at the end, but they ended up not having the budget to make it happen. Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones decided to co-direct the movie, even though neither of them had directed a film before, but they saw it as a great opportunity to learn by doing. And the rest of the group said their inexperience fostered a, quote, level of mutual disrespect always found in Monty Python's work. Now they just needed funding, but no studio wanted to pay for the movie. So they hit up some of their rock star friends who could use it as a tax write-off. Terry Gilliam told The Guardian in 2019, this was at the time income tax was running as high as 90% in the UK, so we turned to rock stars for finance. Elton John, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, they all had money, they knew our work, and we seemed a good tax write-off. Except, of course, we weren't. It was like the producers. From the rock stars, they were able to scrape together a budget of £175,350, which was about $410,000 US dollars back then. Today, that would be about $2.5 million. In 2021, Eric Idle revealed where that all came from. Led Zeppelin put up £31,500, Pink Floyd £21,000, Jethro Tull's Ian Anderson contributed £6,300. All those backers ended up receiving profits from the eventual Broadway musical adaptation of the movie Spamalot. Monty Python and the Holy Grail started filming on April 30th, 1974, mostly on location in Scotland. Michael Palin's diary entry tells you everything you need to know about that first day. Quote, first day of filming, into chainmail and Red Cross tabard. John and I driving up through Glencoe in a budget rent-a-van in full chainmail. Camera broke down midway through first shot. They primarily shot at 2 castles in Scotland, Doune Castle and Castle Stalker, though there are a couple of establishing shots of Kidwelly Castle in South Wales and Bodiam Castle in East Sussex. Plus, they use hanging miniatures as well. They had intended to shoot at even more castles around Scotland, but 2 weeks before filming, the Scottish Department of the Environment revoked their permits out of fear the crew would damage the castles. It was a very scrappy film shoot, and they had to get creative to recreate the Middle Ages. Production designer Julian Doyle and his crew built walls in the forest near Doune, and the rocky scenery at the beginning of The Tale of Sir Robin is actually a still photograph of Mount Buffalo National Park in Australia. They placed a candle underneath the photo to create the hazy effect, and then pushed the camera in on the image. Sometimes anachronisms would ruin takes. For example, they weren't able to use the funniest take in The Tale of Sir Galahad at Castle Anthrax because a modern-day coat was visible in the shot. They filmed the rabbit fight scene at Tomadashin Mine using a real animal in some shots, while a puppet was switched in for the kill shots. Graham Chapman struggled with his health throughout the shoot due to his alcoholism. He then decided to refrain from drinking to make it through production, and he ended up becoming fully sober in 1977. The characters ride fake horses in the film because of budget restraints. At first, they were supposed to ride real horses, but they couldn't afford it, so they came up with a gag in which they mime riding horses using the coconuts as sound effects. Coconuts are what old radio shows used to use back in the day to recreate horse trotting. The movie's German title actually translates to The Knights of the Coconut, while the movie's Hungarian title is Galloping on Foot. After filming wrapped, they hired frequent Python collaborator Neil Innes to compose the film's score. Except Innes did too good of a job and made the movie appear too serious. hilarious. While the final film still includes some of Innes's music, they ended up throwing out a lot of his work and using more stereotypical canned tracks from stock recording libraries instead. There was some back and forth about what to cut from the movie and what to keep in. For example, the film's editor revealed to the Daily Mail that some Pythons wanted to cut the legendary Black Knight scene because, quote, it was so bloody, it was killing the rest of the film. It's a good thing they left it in, as it's one of the funniest, most quotable parts of the movie. They did cut some planned animation sequences and a scene where Arthur knights a peasant only to stab him when the prop castle in the background falls over. Though that last scene was included in the movie's trailer. But around the time the movie was finished, Monty Python was almost going to break up. By early 1975, the TV show had wrapped, they had nearly finished the movie, like I said, and it seemed like they might go on to do other things. John Cleese was moving on to Fawlty Towers, and according to the Telegraph, Monty Python was considered a spent creative force in the UK. But they still had to release The Holy Grail. It opened in London on April 3rd, 1975, followed by a New York City run on April 28th, 1975. They didn't expect success in the US, but what they hadn't realized was the TV show was growing their fan base stateside thanks to its airings on PBS. On the day of the New York premiere, Palin wrote in his diary, "We were to be at Cinema 2 on 3rd Avenue at 11 a.m. to welcome the first crowds and to give out coconuts as people came out. The phone rang. Could we get down to the cinema as quickly as possible? There had been people queuing since 5:30 a.m. The movie grossed $122,000 in its first 3 weeks in London and $35,000 in its first week in New York. It would slowly expand to more theaters, though there's no record of how many exactly. But after 3 years, the movie made £2.36 million in the UK, which is about $3 million, and it made $5.17 million in the US and Canada during its first run. All total, that's approximately 20 times its budget. Reviews at the time were mixed. The New York Times, LA Times, and New Yorker liked the movie, while Variety and Gene Siskel were less enthused. Gene Siskel wrote, "It contained about 10 very funny moments and 70 minutes of silence." But over the years, The Holy Grail has gone through a critical reappraisal, with many recognizing its brilliance. So today, 91% of the 126 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. And because of the movie, Monty Python had this newfound success in the US, and that kept them together. They ended up touring in the States and eventually made Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life. And John Cleese said Holy Grail was the first time the group made any real money. The movie had its television premiere in February 1977 on CBS, but because it was American TV, the swears and the blood were cut out, and the Pythons were not happy about this. They ended up pulling the TV rights, and from then on would only let the movie run unedited on PBS and eventually cable stations like Comedy Central and IFC. Holy Grail would grow into a cult classic and is now regarded as one of the funniest movies of all time. In 2000, Total Film readers voted it the 5th greatest comedy movie ever. A 2011 poll by ABC and People found it to be the 2nd funniest movie ever made after Airplane. The movie's been re-released in theaters and on home video numerous times, and in 2005, Eric Idle adapted it into the Broadway musical Spamalot, which was nominated for 14 Tony Awards, winning 3 including Best Musical and Best Featured Actress for Sarah Ramirez, who played the lady in the lake. Ramirez was so good in the show, ABC told them they could be in any TV series they wanted. Ramirez picked Grey's Anatomy, where they would play Callie Torres for 11 seasons. Spamalot grossed $168 million in its initial run on Broadway, and then it was revived again on Broadway in 2023, running for 6 months total. Fox actually intended to make a movie adaptation of Spamalot in 2019. The project was then moved to Paramount in 2020, but then in 2021, Eric Idle said the movie would not be made after 2 other Python members opposed the remake. And if you made it to the end of this video, drop a knee in the comments.